So today we're going to go over how to write a good proposal for Beamtime at the CLS. And um, in the next 45 minutes or so, we'll give you an overview of the process of getting access to the experimental facilities at the Canadian Light Source. So I'll stop for questions in the middle and again at the end, but hopefully we'll be able to point you in the right direction with writing your proposal for CLS Beamtime. I'll start by going over some of the terminology and the basic information about how the CLS operates and the different access mechanisms that are available to you. As most of you are probably interested in submitting a proposal for our current call for proposals, we'll look at how our peer review process works, and finally, how to submit a proposal. And I'll try to provide some useful tips that you can use as you prepare to write your own proposals. So what is Beamtime? Beamtime is a word that's part of the normal vernacular at the CLS, and it just means access to a CLS beamline. And a beamline is a specific set of equipment designed to do a specific type of experiment with synchrotron light. So Beamtime is allocated in 8-hour increments that are called shifts, and we schedule Beamtime in 6-month cycles. So if you look at a single day on our calendar, we'll look at this one. It's broken up into 3 shifts. They can start at midnight, 8 a.m. or 4 p.m. And each one is scheduled for a specific type of operations. So we have time at the Synchrotron that's dedicated to maintenance. So that would be the blue shifts that you see. And that's times when we're shut down to work on equipment or to upgrade things that we don't need beam for. The orange shifts are development time. So that's time where we are running the machine, which is a broad term that includes the linear accelerator, the booster ring, the storage ring, and all of the underlying equipment that we need to run those things. So we're running the machine, and we can use that orange development time to test and upgrade the storage ring beam itself. And then the green shifts are what's left over, and that is our normal time, and that's available to users for Beamtime. So each beamline manages their own scheduling of users throughout the green shifts that are available to them. And there are a few different mechanisms to get Beamtime. So the first one I'll talk about is purchased access, which is actually the only mechanism that's available for proprietary research, where you're not intending to publish. But it can also be useful for academic users in some situations. And some users have found it to be useful to start working with our industrial team and then move on to the peer-reviewed access mechanisms later on. The next access type is rapid access, and this is available for proposals at any time. And when you submit a rapid access proposal, you're asking for Beamtime in the current cycle that we're in. So right now we're in cycle 34, which runs from July 1st, 2021 until the end of this year. So if you want rapid access in this cycle, you can submit a rapid access proposal. The caveat there is that it relies on the beamline that you want to use having time available for you. And it's also really intended for smaller projects or just finishing up a thesis or something very short term. So these projects are only valid for 6 months. And if you need time beyond that, then you should follow through and submit a proposal during a call for proposals. And then that would give you general user access. And this is peer-reviewed access, and it emphasizes scientific excellence where there is an intent to publish your results. So proposals for Beamtime are scored by peer reviewers, ranked by their scores against all other proposals for the beamline that you're intending to use. And then the top scoring proposals are allocated Beamtime. and that allocation of beam time happens every cycle. So if you want beam time after the original cycle when you submitted your proposal, then you just need to submit a beam time request to be considered for beam time in subsequent cycles. The cost to users for each shift of beam time is $1. So it's slightly more affordable than our purchased access mechanism. There's one last beam access mechanism, which is beam teams. So every Beamline has a group of users that forms their Beamline advisory team, which we affectionately refer to as the beam team. And the CLS and the beam team have a memorandum of understanding that determines what percentage of available beam time should be dedicated to the beam team. So members of the beam team might be scientists who fronted the application for the money that built the Beamline originally, or they might be people that are playing a large role in the design, commissioning, or scientific development of the Beamline. So membership of beam teams, if there's someone who wants to join a beam team, they would usually have a relationship with the Beamline, and they would contact the user executive committee to discuss possibilities of joining a beam team. So how much time is there to go around? So let's look at the current cycle that we're in. There are 226 green shifts, which are normal time available for users. And on every Beamline, 10% of those shifts are dedicated to maintenance and development. 10% are reserved for the Beamline scientists' experiments. Up to 25% is used for purchased access. So that's variable. There are some Beamlines where they essentially have no purchased access time reserved, and there are other Beamlines that are pretty much always using that 25%. Beam team access, again, is up to 25%, and that depends on the agreement with that particular beam team. So there are some Beamlines where there's no beam team access reserved at all, and there are others where it's up to 25%. And then we come to the leftovers, which is the general user time. So this is at least 30% at a minimum. So if we look at that in terms of shifts, that means that we're left with 68 shifts to allocate to peer-reviewed proposals. And of course, that could be higher depending on the purchased access and the beam team access that's needed. But you can see that providing peer-reviewed access can become quite a competitive situation. So I'll show you our process. This is sort of an outline. We open a call for proposals twice a year. It's open for about 4 weeks, and it can feel like after you've submitted your proposal that there's just a long time of waiting with maybe not much happening, but I can assure you there's a lot happening behind the scenes. So after you submit your proposals, it's reviewed for feasibility by our Beamline staff. So they'll be able to say whether the experiment can be done on the Beamline that you've selected or not. And then your review goes into the your proposal goes into the scientific peer review. So each proposal is assigned to a peer review committee member, and that PRC member assigns it to external reviewers. And once we have all of the scores for scientific merit assembled, then we can rank the proposals and allocate beam time to the highest scoring proposals. And after that point, that's when we'll notify you of the results of the peer review, and then you'll be contacted by Beamline staff if you were allocated beam time to arrange scheduling during the beam time period. So it's our peer review committee that is responsible for the reviews of scientific merit. And this is an international committee. You'll notice there's no one from the University of Saskatchewan on this list. So no one has an advantage over anyone else in this process. The CLS management assigns each proposal to a peer review committee member based on their expertise. And then those PRC members assign the proposal to additional reviewers, external reviewers, based on the expertise that we have from our reviewers. And typically each proposal will get between 2 and 5 additional reviews of scientific merit. After all of the reviews have come in, then the PRC will meet face-to-face or camera to camera, as we do now, and they'll review those reviews. So any proposal that really stands out in some way, if it got particularly low scores, the PRC looks at those proposals in detail to make sure that nothing's out of line, that it doesn't appear that there's any bias from any of the reviewers. And they'll also look at proposals where there was a big standard of deviation, if reviewers were really disagreeing on where this proposal should fall. And the PRC, it's at their discretion if they would like to discard any reviews that seem inappropriate to them. So the reviews are done on a 5-point scale, from 1 being exceptional down to 5 being poor. And if there's a score of 5, that's essentially a recommendation to the CLS not to award that proposal any beam time. So the technical reviews that are done by CLS staff, that's just a review of, can this experiment be done on this beamline? So is it feasible? Can the beamline support it? And also the capability of your team. And that's a measure of how many publications you've had in the past, if you've done this type of research before. And it's taking into account all of the team members that you list on your proposal. The scientific reviews are, again, from 1 to 5. And there are at least 2 external peer review scores that you're going to get for your proposal. And then again, it's a 1 to 5 scale. So if you get a 5 in the technical reviews, we don't even go through with the scientific review because the experiment is not feasible. It's impossible or difficult enough to do on the beamline that it will not receive beam time. So we don't go through with the scientific reviews. And yeah, you would be contacted at that time. So after we have all of our scores in, those go to the allocation committee, and proposals are ranked based on their scientific merit score. So the top scoring proposals will typically get beam time. You can see that the green lines are the ones that could be accommodated with the available beam time that we had. So if you're below this red cutoff line, even though your score might be pretty good, a 2 is not a bad score by any means. It might just be below the cutoff line where we're not able to award beam time to that proposal at that time. There's also, there are certain cases where the number of requested beam shifts of beam time might be adjusted to try to accommodate more users on the beamline. And if there's a tie, if there are a number of proposals that all have the same score, then that's a time when the allocation committee might look at additional factors such as the feasibility and capability scores. And also strategic areas. If there are certain proposals, for instance, right now we have a COVID call that's open. So if you're doing COVID research, we're gonna work hard to try to get you beam time while still respecting the principles of our peer review system. So the question of the day, how do I get a good score? And the main factor is that you need to talk to the experts. So look at the beamlines that might be able to host your experiment and talk to the beamline scientists on that beamline. Those are the people that will be evaluating your proposal for the feasibility or suitability and capability. So they can help you estimate an appropriate number of shifts, tell you how you might need to prepare your samples, and point you in the right direction for coming up with a good experimental plan. So go to the source. The next way to get a good score is to check the answer key. So this is the rubric that our scientific merit reviewers are asked to evaluate your proposals against. So this is available on our website as well. So read it and write your proposal for the rubric. The things that the reviewers want to know are the importance and the quality of your science, and they want to know that you have a good experimental plan and that your plans for collecting data and for analyzing that data are going to address your scientific question. So definitely look at this as you're preparing your proposal. And what to do after your scores are back. If you had a good score and you were awarded Beamtime, then your project is active for 2 years, and that's 4 6-month cycles. So you keep using that same score in subsequent cycles. So when you submit a Beamtime request for the next cycle, we'll rank your project in with all of the new proposals using your good score for the ranking. The flip side of that is that if your score is not great, your project is still active for 2 years, and you can keep trying, keep throwing your proposal into the mix for being considered for allocation. But your score might not be strong enough to be awarded for Beamtime in future cycles if it was not strong enough for this cycle. So what you can do, instead of submitting a Beamtime request, you can submit a new proposal in the next call for proposals, and use the comments that you got from peer reviewers to strengthen your experimental plan. And there are tools in the user portal so that you can clone your proposal and edit it if you'd like, or you can start completely fresh. So for cycle 35, which is the cycle that we're talking about in this call for proposals, some of the important dates that you need to know: in 2 weeks from today, the call for proposals closes at noon. Reviews will need to be completed by the middle of October. And then users will be notified in the first week of November about the results of allocation. So that's when you'll find out what your scientific scores were and if you were allocated Beamtime. You might hear from us in between, especially during the review period. If reviewers need any clarification from you about your proposal, they can do that through the user portal. They can send a request to you. So it's to your benefit to respond as quickly as possible and to get them the information that they need to adequately review your proposal. So then November and December can be used to schedule, and the Beamtime in question is from January to June of next year. So I'd like to take a little pause just to make sure we answer any questions that you might have up till now before I move on to going through the actual process of submitting a proposal. So if you have a question, hand. And if not, then we'll carry on. Okay, sounds good. I got the thumbs up. So in the user portal, the first thing that you need to do to submit a proposal is to register as a CLS user. So when you go to the registration, you click New User at the bottom, and it'll take you to this registration form. Oh, there's a question. how many times do we get beam access in a rapid proposal? So the rapid access proposals are valid for 6 months. So you could technically have beam time multiple times in that 6 months. But it really depends on the availability of the beamline. So if there are shifts available, and after that 6 months, then you need to move into the general user population and submit a peer-reviewed proposal. So it really depends on the beamline, but you can request shifts as many times as you want, and it's just going to depend on availability. So after you've registered as a CLS user, then you'll see your dashboard, which might have fewer features than this one, but the general features in the user portal are proposal submission, which we're talking about today, all of the reviews and the clarifications, that all happens in the user portal. You'll see your proposal scores in the user portal. You can manage your project in terms of updating your sample information. Also in the user portal, we have beam time schedules and the publications database. So I was talking about capability earlier, and one of the ways that we measure capability is your publication record. So definitely if you've had CLS beam time in the past and you have publications from that time, you want to make sure that we have those in our publications database and add them so that we know that your work is getting out there. One of the big challenges when you're submitting a proposal as a new user is selecting the right beamline for your work. So there are a few different ways to kind of approach this. In the user portal, there's a facilities tab. So you can look at all of the different facilities at the CLS, and on each one, you'll be able to see what the specifications are, specifically the spectral range. So depending on your experiment, you're probably going to have a specific range of X-rays that you're wanting to use, and also the techniques that they support. So that's one way to look through. On the CLS website, there's also a lot of information about each beamline, including the contact for each beamline. So we have a beamline responsible, who is the person that sort of oversees the beamline and manages everything having to do with that specific beamline. So those are the people that are really good to contact when you're considering submitting a proposal for their beamline. So you can see we cover a broad spectral range. So you can start by looking at the spectral range. You can start by looking at techniques. And if you're really not sure, you can always contact us and we can try to point you in the right direction. It's just solutions@lightsource.ca. So submitting a proposal, it's a pretty, the actual filling out of the form is pretty straightforward. The main tips I'd like to really emphasize is that you should contact Beamline staff to discuss your experiment. They're going to be very helpful with making sure that you hit the right points in your proposal. Also, most Beamlines have a document or a web page that has specific instructions for that beamline and specific tips about how to write a good proposal for that beamline. So make sure that you look on the CLS website to find those instructions. There are also instructions in the proposal form itself for every field as you're filling it out to make sure that you read that text. And really important, the thing that we hear probably the most from our peer review committee, sort of as an insider's tip, is they want to know more about your experimental plan. Have you thought through how the actual experiment is going to flow? What measurements you're going to need, how long it's going to take? So it's a really important part. Of course, they want to know how important and high quality your research is as well. But you kind of need both of those parts. And also, if you want, if you have an experiment that could benefit from techniques on multiple beamlines, you can definitely submit a proposal that requests beam time on multiple beamlines. So I'll just switch over to my browser. If I can. Okay, so this is my profile. I hope you can see. This isn't actually me. I'm not Marie Curie. But I've made a profile for her. So as I was mentioning, you can look in the facilities tab. You can see what the specifications are and what techniques are available. You can visit their website, or you can see what our current schedule is to see what kind of what's happening at the facility today. And I'll just go to my dashboard. So on all of your dashboards, you should have a block like this that talks about proposals. So to create a proposal, the first thing that you need to do is give your proposal a title and choose which access mechanism you're going to be applying for. So scientific commissioning access, that's for beamlines that are not fully operational yet. If they're commissioning a new technique, you might want to use that access mechanism. That will absolutely require you to talk to Beamline staff before submitting those proposals. Rapid access, if I want beam time like in the next couple of months and I don't want to wait for my 6 months, then I could try a rapid access proposal. COVID-19 is essentially the same as the rapid access proposals, just for COVID research. But today I'm going to do a general user proposal. So this will be submitted to the peer review process for cycle 35. So there are different tabs on the proposal form. The abstract, there are instructions here about how to write a good abstract. It's really important to read these instructions and make sure you hit all of the important points. The subject areas and keywords, these are the things that will be used by science management to help direct your proposal to the right peer reviewers. So we assign your proposal, we want to assign your proposal to a PRC member that knows about your area of science, and they want to be able to assign additional external reviewers that are relevant to your research. So it's really important to select appropriate subject areas, and also add keywords if there's nothing, if you can't find anything relevant in the subject area list. The scientific description, this is where you would really talk about the work that you're planning to undertake, your objectives, and a general plan of your work. Yeah, so read these instructions. And then there are two fields at the bottom. So societal, economic, and industrial relevance. So this is how your research can benefit society in some way. So I'm sure that all of you have an elevator pitch about how your research can benefit society, and that's where you would include that. The last field on this tab, Benefits to Canada, is a new one in this particular cycle. It might feel like this is not relevant if you're outside of Canada, and that may be true. If there are no foreseeable benefits to Canada that you can see, just put not applicable. This particular field will not be used in the peer review process. So reviewers will be instructed not to allow the benefits to Canada section to influence their scientific scores. It'll be very useful for us, especially as we are in Canada and we rely on many Canadian funders. We want to make sure that we are able to confidently express how important research is to Canada to our funders. And so the information that you provide here could really help us in that way. I'm going to go back to my dashboard because I have a proposal that I'm already in progress. So I'll just edit it. So if I hit save on my proposal when I'm in here, it will pop up some issues for me in the form. So it'll tell me that I have 3 things left on my description that I need to fix. So I haven't entered an abstract, a scientific description, or societal relevance. My research team is complete. So I am the spokesperson and the principal investigator as well, and my delegate is Pierre Curie. And you can add any other team members there. The email address that you enter here should be the same one that they would have used when they registered as a CLS user in order for us to match them. But you can edit that at any point, even once your proposal has been approved and you're at the project stage. The principal investigator is the person who will be billed for or invoiced for your beam time. And you should make sure that that's entered correctly. We want to know where you're getting your funding from and what makes your team capable of performing this research. And I think I saw a question. Oh, what if the benefits to Canada and society highly overlap? Can it be practically the same information in both sections? Yes, absolutely. They may definitely overlap. For the Beamline section, this is where you select the beamline that you're interested in. And this can actually also be a useful tool when you're trying to choose the beamline that you want. So if I just clear these out. So let's say I want to do computed laminography. Once I've chosen that technique, the facilities list will be limited to only the beamlines that support that technique. So I would choose BMIT here. And likewise, if I know that I need to use CMCF, the only technique available is macromolecular crystallography at that suite of beamlines. So this can be a very useful tool as well when you're just trying to figure out which beamline might work best for you. And at this point, if I knew that I needed to do resonant soft X-ray scattering at Reichs, then I would contact Teak, Feiju, or Ronnie about my experiment and try to get some information about what kind of experimental procedures I might be looking at and better understanding how that beamline is suitable to my research. Another box, because we have a number of beamlines that are oversubscribed, which means that we have more applications for beam time than we're able to accommodate, you can select this box. And especially if you have some techniques that are supported by multiple beamlines, if there's not time on the beamline you selected, we may be able to fit you in on another beamline that can do similar experiments. For scheduling, it's helpful if you can tell us which dates are preferred and which dates are not, with the understanding that these are just suggestions. It can be quite a complicated process to schedule a cycle of beam time, especially if there are end station changes that need to happen for different experiments. We like to group those together so that we don't have to shift equipment on the beamline too often. So there are a number of factors that come into play when trying to optimize a beamline schedule. So if you can provide some dates that are better or worse for you, that can be helpful. And let us know if there's anything that's really pertinent. We also have a number of labs that are available on site, so you can indicate here which facilities you might need in addition to the beamline. And materials. So we need to know exactly what samples you're bringing on site with you. So we want to know what the name is, the chemical information, what type of sample it is, the source, if you know it, the physical state, and also any hazards that are associated with it. And any samples that are deemed hazardous, you will be responsible to bring a safety data sheet with that sample on site. For the quantity, you want to make sure that you include units in the quantity. So 1 isn't necessarily terribly informative, but we want to know the amounts that you're going to have. Especially with samples that are hazardous, the amounts can really make a big difference in the risks that are identified and how we mitigate those risks for your experiment. So I have a couple of samples entered here, and now that I've entered them, I can use them on other proposals later on. So I wouldn't need to enter the same information twice. And this is all auto-populated based on the samples that I entered above. So I don't need to say that it's radioactive. That's already been identified in my list of samples. You need to include a sample handling procedure and tell us what you're going to be doing with any waste that's generated at the CLS. So it's a really good idea to save your proposal regularly, just to make sure you don't lose any work and to make sure that you see where you still need to keep going with your with filling out your form. And then you can preview your proposal. And once you're happy with it, you can submit it. There's also room for up to 2 pages of a scientific attachment if you have some supplementary information or graphs or some preliminary data that you've collected. That can be really useful as well to attach to your proposal. And in the future, you can also clone your proposals and then just edit them rather than starting completely from scratch. So I think that's about it for the demo. I'm just going to go back to the presentation. So if you have any questions, we have that solutions@lightsource.ca address, and we also have a world-renowned suite of scientists that are available to answer your questions as well. So feel free to contact any of these people. And on the CLS website, there is a How We Can Help section as well, which can be very helpful as you're starting out. And there are other resources. We have our user services office, which can be helpful if you have any trouble with your account, with logging in. General science inquiries, of course, go to that solutions@lightsource.ca. We have an agriculture hub, which has some really useful information if you're in the agriculture field. Some some really good tips about how to write an agriculture proposal specifically, and also in energy materials and in situ hub. So this is a really great resource for information about different sample condition equipment that we have on site. So all the different pieces of equipment that you can use to create the right in situ environment for your sample. And each Beamline also maintains a website with information that's relevant, including detailed contact information for all of the Beamline staff and a user guide. Once you actually are at the Beamline, they have a lot of really good information about how to use their Beamlines. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. I saw a few in the Q&A. So the first question, is it possible to propose an experiment that requires more than one beamline, for example, mid-IR and PXRD? Yes, absolutely. There are lots of experiments that where you might take a sample and measure something on mid-IR and take it over to another beamline for another experiment. And if you have a proposal like that, make sure that you include in your scheduling requirements if you would prefer to try to coordinate your beam time on the different beam lines or make 2 separate trips. Yeah. How does writing a submission for a subsequent beam time request following an initial successful proposal differ from writing a proposal? A beam time request, after you have a successful proposal, then you just submit a beam time request, which is essentially just asking how many shifts you want in the upcoming cycle, and what you've done with your previous beam time and what you plan to do with this current beam time. So it's a much shorter process, and it doesn't go through peer review since you've already done that. So when you submit a beam time request, you just get ranked into the set of new proposals and other beam time requests based on your scientific merit score. How precise should be the amount of the sample which will be brought to CLS? For example, if we want to do 5 experiments that require 1 milligram of sample, it would be 5 milligrams, but it's always more than the minimum required amount. Be as accurate as you can. There is, for every access mechanism, samples and the experiment goes through a safety review before it runs at the CLS. So we're going to have a safety reviewer who will look at your samples and evaluate what risks might be there. So if they're not sure, give the best information that you have, and they may ask you for clarification if they need. So I'm not sure if that helps either. And another question, can I mention previous publications in my research group using the same techniques I applied for? Yes, absolutely. It's great to know that you have experience with the technique that you're applying for, and that you have the capability to do this research. So that's absolutely relevant. Okay, well, if you have any questions, feel free to contact any of our science managers. You can reach out to me directly as well. My email is kathryn.janzen@lightsource.ca. And of course, the solutions at lightsource.ca is always available for us to try to point you in the right direction.